Hello, and welcome to Real Menopause Talk. My guest today is Freddy Carrick. Freddy's story is one of reinvention time and again, especially around and throughout her perimenopausal and menopausal years. A super strong advocate for HRT, she is clearly a tower of strength. She also has 5 things she would like to say to men. Before we continue, I would like to give a massive shout out to our sponsor, Cozy Earth, who create the most fabulous bed linen, amongst other things. Travel and loungewear, and socks, towels, but let's not forget the socks with autumn coming up, or fall for those of you who are stateside, of which there are many, which I'm very happy about, so howdy USA. Cozy Earth sheets, pillowcases and duvets are so smooth and soft, and they have the essential benefit of temperature regulation, which has honestly transformed my sleep. Take a good look at their website, cozyearth.com, that's COZY or COZY, your choice, cozyearth.com, and use the code MENOPAUSE for 35% off your best sleep yet. Freddy, it is really lovely to meet you.
It's my pleasure, Hattie, to come and talk to you about my favourite subject.
I can't wait to hear about your background, how you've got to doing what you're doing. So first of all, would you like to tell me a little bit about yourself?
I was born in Cumbria, in a small town south of the Scottish border. I've lived in many places around the world. And so now people tend to take sweepstakes on where I'm from because my accent is it could be Scottish borders, it could be Zimbabwe. I am still, or rather I came back to living in Cumbria, which is the Lake District part of the United Kingdom, in 87. That was after the end of a first marriage. And I realized recently when I was writing a biography of myself that throughout my life, I've started businesses which were appropriate for women who were also at my stage of life. For example, when I was first married to an RAF officer, he told me the day before our wedding that he was going to be made redundant, and we had 1 year. And I had been looking forward to a settled and fulfilling life in the RAF. So all the cards were thrown up in the air and I had to reevaluate everything that I was doing. And I decided to train as a beauty therapist. So we moved away from Lincolnshire, which is where he was based. We moved down to Sussex and I trained as an esthetician and an aromatherapist. Following that, I opened the first salon with spa outside of London and was the very first user of Clarins products when they were introduced into the United Kingdom. You know, these things I had not realized were significant, as I say, until recently. That marriage didn't last very long, and I returned back to Cumbria and had to reinvent myself because I had no employment up here in Cumbria. So I started selling cosmetics for a party plan company. And what I really loved about that was taking the message to women who were rural, very rural. I took my box of skincare and cosmetics, and I know for sure that I was able to change the lives of so many women just because I had the experience of looking at their skin and advising them and just giving them a couple of tweaks, maybe one product, perhaps 4 or 5. These were women who could not go to a beauty counter easily because they were working in a factory, and at weekends they had family to care for. So they didn't have that playtime, that me time that many women take for granted now. My very first need had been to become cabin crew. And so I travelled extensively before marrying that RAF chap. And I had a need to travel again. So away I went and became a travel rep. For whatever reason, my family needed me. So I again returned back to Cumbria, again had to reinvent myself. And this was around about the time that Jane Fonda had pulled on her leg warmers. I had been to some exercise classes and no one was teaching this type of exercise in my hometown or area. And so I thought, okay, well, I can do that. So I got together with a girlfriend and we got ourselves trained up. We opened our first class. We called it Dance for Your Life. And again, it was hugely successful. My father died, unfortunately, at around about that time. So I made the choice of staying with my mother and just building that business. And again, I know for absolute fact that I managed to change or help women to change their lives, insofar as probably for the first time, many women had a reason to go out and spend money on themselves, on trainers, on leotards, on the nice things, the things that make you feel a little bit feminine. And they were coming to my classes and I could see them shrinking, shaping up and shrinking before my very eyes. It was just a lovely, fulfilling episode of my life. Following that, I married a local farmer. We had a son. And, over the years, my classes diminished because there were several towns that were opening, health centres. And quite rightly, people preferred to go there than be on a dirty, dusty carpet. I was in my 40s when my marriage began to fall apart. And, things were just really, really horrendous, emotionally horrendous. We divorced. By the age of 48, I've managed to pull myself back from the brink of suicide, starting a new career as a pharmaceutical representative, a really challenging, high-performing activity. And it was a 2-year intense training program. Needing again to reinvent myself because, like a lot of farming families, the money is all tied up in the farm. And therefore, there wasn't very much at all for me as a financial settlement. And unfortunately, I became homeless and had to rely on family. My mother helped me out a little bit, and I was able to pull myself together enough to start this new career as a pharmaceutical rep, which was, again, deeply fulfilling. Talking about mental health issues, that was one of the first therapy areas I was trained in. And it gave me a really deep insight into what I personally had gone through. A little while later, probably around the year 2000, and because of my experience in the pharmaceutical industry, I realized that I was probably going through menopause. Okay, da-da, bells jangling. I, at that time, had thought that HRT was only for other people, film stars, wealthy, others, not for me. However, I did go to my GP and we talked about it and he said, yeah, of course. Give it a try, see how you get on. And around about that time, we were still using the old oral that was created. The estrogen was created from pregnant mare's urine. It's rarely used in the UK now, but it certainly was still used then. So I got onto that and did get on with it terribly well, actually, because I wasn't very good at taking the pills at the right time. And if I missed, it was probably the progestogen that I missed. And I used to get horrendous headaches. Then, at around about that time, that Women's Health Initiative trial was published and all the cards came tumbling down. So I continued without HRT and still am without HRT. And I'm probably now 20 years post-menopause.
So you're telling me you've basically created industries and been homeless and at the rock bottom of mental health. And here you are. It's remarkable.
This is why you and I do what we're doing.
Yes, it is.
I'll continue because I'm going to get emotional, but that's okay too. The last 5 years of my working life, I was parked in the sick bay of my company because I had an experience at a company meeting one day where I had that scotoma, that blankness. And I looked around the room at all of my colleagues. There were about 20 of us in the room. And I could not recognize the vocabulary they were using to describe the job that I was doing. I couldn't figure out what their intentions were. And it really frightened me. And I drove home feeling, I'm done. I'm finished. I can't do this anymore. And I had been feeling tired for some time. So I was 58 then. And for your listeners, this is deeply important because menopause is not just about the end of bleeding. It's about how your body rebalances without the estrogen and the struggles that you will face In my capacity as a menopause educator now, I regularly hear women say, with great confidence and gusto, oh, I sailed through menopause, barely a hot flush, absolutely no problem. Or, oh, I'm all over that. 4 years ago, menopause stopped. Or rather, my bleeding stopped. I'm through all of that. I don't need anything. On closer examination, those women are very often on antidepressants. I was not. At the age of 58, I was not on antidepressants. But I had been during the early stage of my training, because it was really full on, highly demanding, and I still hadn't yet recovered from the deeply unpleasant divorce. That day when I sat in the room and looked at all of my colleagues and drove home crying, 2-hour drive home crying, I forgot that only weeks earlier at our national meeting, I had been presented Sales Champion of the Year. And yet here I was, sitting in the room with no clue what I could possibly say. And that's what estrogen deficiency can do for you. I struggled on for a year or two more, and then eventually my son had mental health problems as well, cannabis-related mental health issues, and I just couldn't struggle. I had a mother who was by then in her late 80s and needed further support. And this is a story that many, many women of that age will tell. Many women. And because we as women get so involved in other parts of our lives, we forget to take care of ourselves. So eventually my company decided to replace me. So I took the half pay and I stayed at home and simply doodled, actually. Just, filled my time. I have dogs, it was all right, really. Felt a total failure a lot of the time, but time went by. And then I thought, well, okay, so I'm not that anymore. So what am I going to do? Trained as a life coach. And it was one of the most beautiful gifts I could have given to myself. One of the tasks that I had was to be a dancer on the stage. I know. Yeah, I saw you gasp.
I was not expecting that.
No, I know. There I was on the stage dancing in front of 12,000 people. Very often there were a group of women standing at the stage waiting for me to come off. I mean, I was a part of a troupe. I wasn't alone. There were usually 12, 15 of us on the stage. But very often these ladies would say, I'm never going to dye my hair again. How long did it take you to reach this? When did you start to leave the colour off? Or did you colour your hair at all? And I did. And how do you stay so fit? So it was all of these kind of questions. And when I was going to the live training meetings, women would regularly come to me and say, I love your energy. It's this, it's that, it's whatever. And as part of giving back to that community, I decided that I would write a book on how to retire as a goddess. And when I started researching that book, I knew that I would have to put a chapter in there about menopause, large part of every woman's life. And I have to tell you, Hattie, I was stunned to discover that the conversation had not moved forward one spot since I had gone through my own menopause 20 years earlier. So then I realized the whole book had to be about menopause and a little chapter on how to retire as a goddess.
Freddie, can we go back to your own depression and how you managed that in the wake of your divorce and given your age at the time?
Well, my depression years before, my son was about 2 years old, my thyroid stopped working. It's an immune reaction, apparently. Well, a GP told me that thyroid deficiency and depression often go hand in hand. And again, of course, why wouldn't they? They're both hormonally driven. I suspect the battle with a husband who was quite controlling and displayed what I now know as personality behavior disorder was really challenging. And I'm a very open and outgoing person. The period of time when my thyroid wasn't working so well, I was unresponsive in many areas of my life. And so he managed to get greater control over me. That doesn't sound very pleasant. And it wasn't. People are what they are. I don't hold any resentment or anger or bitterness or any of that towards him now. He is what he is, and he was the product of his own parenting, as they were products of their own parenting. But what it actually meant for me was that I was just drowning, really, in the misery of not being loved. Before I left him, he already had a new partner. And because of the divorce laws at the time, I had to stay in the same house with him while he went and came and went with his new partner. And my son was only 7. So it was just hard, really, just hard. And a doctor did give me some Prozac. I hated it. Didn't take it for very long, but that period of time was very dark and very lonely. And I was ashamed, deeply ashamed of not being able to manage. Of course, the interesting thing is we now realize, as I'm giving you that timeline, I was heavily into perimenopause and I had no idea. And nor did anybody else. Absolutely. It was never mentioned until I approached my GP when my bleeding was chaotic and kind of, the penny dropped.
So you're taking antidepressants prescribed by your GP for a short period of time. What was the length of time between them and starting HRT?
That whole episode is very blurred and confused now. But I would say I took the Prozac for 2 years. So there would be a gap of perhaps 3 years between me ending the Prozac and then the realization that maybe I needed HRT. I stayed on the Premarin for about 18 months, I'm guessing, until the doctor told me that I should come off because of this breast cancer scare. I would say to women, if you are having headaches or you don't feel that your hormone supplements are doing the best that they can for you, look at the dose that you're taking, the time of the day that you take it, and set yourself reminders to take it. Most importantly, at the right time, because estrogen has a very short time that it's effective in your body. For example, if you forget to take your estrogen supplement, it is washed out of your body within a day and a half.
So consistency is key.
Really, it is. Yeah. It's also really important to understand that mental health difficulties are often created by this staccato effect of the ovaries closing down. One day you'll have some estrogen supplied to your brain, and maybe for 3 days further you'll have very little or none at all, and then suddenly there'll be a spurt of estrogen again. And the brain does not like that staccato effect. The brain needs a steady state of hormonal excitement, if you like, or energy. When you forget to take the supplements at the right time of day on a regular daily basis, that's when you could put yourself back into some of the symptoms you'd noticed earlier.
What do you get asked the most as a menopause health coach?
But it doesn't matter how much there is written about menopause and HRT. Women always want to know what's right for me. So what would you suggest, Freddie, for me? I would often refer them back to the Balance app, which Louise Newson has produced to give them background information. And I will suggest the most easily used and the most successful versions of HRT to them, and they will come back to me and they give me the biggest thumbs up.
What influenced your decision to stay off HRT?
Purely, it was never offered me back. The Women's Health Initiative trial threw so many millions of women onto the sideline of menopause, and we were done.
If you were to go back in time, or perhaps forwards in time, do you feel you might have done things differently?
Yes, in a heartbeat. I would absolutely, now that I know what I know, I would not hesitate to actually demand HRT when I was 45. And I would urge every woman to discover why that is important. And it is important for her long-term mental health, as well as all the other systems in her body that need the estrogen. So don't fluff around. Women regularly say to me, I'm saving HRT until my symptoms get too bad. And I go, no, don't do that. Please, ladies, supplement your estrogen. Your body is shrieking out for it.
Do you have any specific advice for the men of the world?
I absolutely do, Hattie, and I'm really pleased you asked me that question.
Well, I'd love to hear it, and I'm sure they would too.
Well, here's a soundbite. Menopause is never a solitary experience. That's why in my book, Menopause Unzipped, I wrote a chapter on menopause so that men would be able to understand what their wives were going through. It's full of helpful tips, and there's a fun quiz at the end of it. I believe that men want to know what's wrong with their wife, partner, sister, mother. They want to know, they want to help. And most of all, they want, because this is the masculine, to fix her. And it is heartbreaking when men say, she's not the girl I married. And therefore, I can't fix her. She won't talk to me. We're breaking up. So much to say on this subject, so much to say. Possibly a big clue for a man that his wife, partner, might be going through early menopause is if she has had PMS symptoms. And again, I'll just take it back to my own experience. My ex-husband used to hear a tone in my voice monthly, and he would turn to me and curl his lip, and he would just say, "Oh God, it's that time of the month." Ta-da!
Wow, words actually fail me, Freddie.
Yeah. Flames, explosions.
I'm not surprised.
So if any men are listening, don't say that. Hattie, I want to point out here as well that on my website, I have a brief piece that I wrote about trans men and women and menopause. And I think it's really important to understand that when a child is born with ovaries and it passes through puberty, that child will go through menopause at some time. Doesn't matter if it's a surgical menopause where the ovaries are removed, a chemical menopause where certain hormone suppressing drugs are given, or it is a natural menopause as that child born with ovaries would go through in their 40s and early 50s. Mm-hmm. But this is true no matter what you call yourself. These are difficulties that need to be discussed and educated on. I'm going to park that right there. So I have 5 things to say to men. 5 helpful tips. But I think it can be summarized in, number 1, educate yourself. You need to understand why menopause happens. In brief, my analogy is we're talking about a redundancy program here. If the factory is pouring out estrogen for years and years and years, and then suddenly it goes, oh, I haven't any need for estrogen anymore. So let's talk about redundancies. So the ovaries discuss what they need to discuss, and they go, you know what, we're just going to go slow for a while. And this is the consultation period of a redundancy program. It could happen over 3 years. It could be 8, 10, 12 years. I know people who are still not post-menopause and they're 56. So, we're talking either a brief time or it could be a longer space of time, but the consultation phase happens. And we women now call that perimenopause. There's a fluctuating supply of estrogen. This is the main driver of the emotional symptoms that your partner's feeling. And then eventually, as the factory closed down, that's post-menopause. So the monthly bleeding has stopped for a year. And on the day that your partner realizes they haven't had a bleed for a year, 12 consecutive months make the year, they are then in post-menopause for the rest of their lives. And it's not over. It's not over then, women, men. It's only just beginning, because there are symptoms that develop as the body is trying to readjust and rebalance without estrogen. And one of the main ones is weight gain. So that happens. So number 2 for men, look at signs and symptoms. Early symptoms, monthly bleeds disruption. Anxiety is another one, where a woman has perhaps been high producing, high performing. And I find often, Hattie, that it's the woman who has been in reasonable control of her life for years. And then the walls come tumbling down because she loses confidence and that anxiety begins. And then we get into the tearfulness, the emotional disruption, and the flaming anger. The woman can turn from a domestic goddess to a volcano in a heartbeat, really. I'm sure you know that too.
I do. As does the rest of the family.
Not a pretty sight. Not a pretty sight, but it happens to us all. All right, so that's number 2, signs and symptoms, get to know them. Number 3, sex and libido. For so many men, this is where they just don't know what's going on, because previously, it doesn't matter how often you have sex, when you are still having sex, maybe it's only twice a month or whatever, there is a level of intimacy and trust within a couple. when the woman going through perimenopause and menopause decides that she no longer wants to have sex with that partner, it's really difficult to understand. And men will say to me, I can't even touch her. She doesn't want me to touch her. Not even touch her. What's that about? And, one of the symptoms can be highly sensitive skin. Sex and libido is a very lonely place for a man when it stops. It's lonely, it's isolating, and he doesn't know who to talk to or what's going on. Does she not love me anymore? Has she got someone else? These are all very natural thoughts that will go through his mind. From the woman's point of view, the loss of a regular supply of estrogen changes the pH balance in the vagina. And the kick on from that can be a fishy smelling discharge. It's not a pretty thing to talk about, but it happens to a lot of women. Happened to me. And women will feel some degree of shame. What have I done? What have I used? Am I allergic to something? There's a part that I really enjoyed writing in the book, and it's the part where I talk a man through how to hold his woman, because I have a personal feeling that every woman needs to feel safe. It's such a primeval need. We need to feel safe and loved. And men want to give us that, but they're not quite sure how. Especially when I hear over and over again women say to me, well, he just thinks a cuddle is foreplay. Sometimes we just want to be held. Because it's trust as well, isn't it? If these changes within her vagina have created a dryness, then penetrative sex can be really deeply painful or not possible, just not possible. I mean, you and I know that there's a lot you can do to create intimacy without penetrative sex. And it's not just inside either. The labia, the lips that actually protect the vagina, they can become really irritated and swollen sometimes. And again, a woman doesn't know why that's happening. And in my case, to go back to me, of course, it's all about me. I took up horse riding again when I was in perimenopause. And I had to ride with bicycle shorts on beneath my jodhpurs and the thickest sanitary towel I could find, just to give me some cushioning to sit on the saddle. It's a typical symptom. So when you take those things into account, it's hardly surprising that a woman doesn't really want to be touched. I would also say moisturize your vagina as often as you moisturize your face. I think you'll find that that's a great tip. It's very much a psychological thing. If you feel healthy down below, so tied in with the feminine psychology. Number 4, it's not about you. It's about your partner going through this whole menopause experience. I think it's really important to remind that certainly in the UK, but the highest rate of female suicide is within this menopausal phase. Those very responsive partners will often go and find the help that she needs before she even acknowledges that she's in perimenopause. Too many women feel that because they can't fix themselves and they don't really understand what's going on, they're, before they've been diagnosed as menopausal or before they realize, she has a belief that her family and or partner will be better off without them. There's a wonderful song written, Carole King, I Am Woman. I would say to every woman, just remember, you are a woman. And every single person on this planet came through a woman. Number 5, do not say these things. Please don't say, for God's sake, go and fix it. Don't tell her she's put weight on. She will know. Don't say you're not the girl I married, because she will also know that. If she develops hot flushes, as 80% of women do, and their facial hot flushes where she either gets a red rash or the sweaty top lip, or even, bless her, dripping forehead, don't point it out. I mean, there are many other things.
Freddy, 20 years post-menopause. Tell us about the glory of it.
It's a really interesting thing that morning when you wake up and you think, I don't give a damn anymore. And to still be healthy and vital, I think this is the greatest gift any woman can give herself. When you're going through the phase of menopause, perimenopause, post, whatever you want to call it, it's really difficult to believe that you can be as you once were. For me, without estrogen at all, it is, I think probably for the last 5 years, and these have been the best years for me, post-menopause. Now that my body has rebalanced itself, I've found what it likes to eat, what nutrition my body really enjoys. I have a great weight. I'm back to what I was when I was in my 20s. I'm strong. I'm healthy. I have great enthusiasm for all sorts of things, and I don't give a damn.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for your wisdom and your stories.
Thank you. I'm holding my heart. I'm deeply grateful. Thank you.
You can find Freddy on LinkedIn under Freddy Carrick. You can find her book, Menopause Unzipped, and her menopause tracker for measuring symptoms on Amazon. The menopause tracker is called What the Heck is Wrong with Me? And it's a written version as opposed to an app. Remember to visit our sponsor's website, cozyearth.com, for the smoothest, coolest night's sleep and more. Plus, for 35% off, use code MENOPAUSE at the checkout. Remember to spread the word, tell everybody you know all about Real Menopause Talk. You can sign up for the newsletter on the website, which is a new version as of season 4, and follow us on Instagram and also LinkedIn. It's lovely to hear from you, so please feel free to drop me an email or a DM. I love hearing your comments and your feedback. Thank you, one and all, for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.